Welcome to the Wobbly Middle, a podcast for women rethinking their careers in midlife.
There's been a bit of a change since our last episode. Most notably, Susanna's cup runneth over. So from here on in, I'll be steering the good ship Wobbly on my own. This season has a light back-to-school theme. Our guests include psychologists, comedians and pathfinders, all people who've changed direction and started something new. Today's guest is a magistrate. If that conjures up an image of a jowly 19th century grump in a wig, Pip Symington is anything but. When a long-term relationship ended in her 20s, Pip chose adventure. She landed a job living and working across China, Japan, Hong Kong and Singapore. She loved the work, said yes to everything, totally immersed herself in it. But then one day, it was gone. This time, Pip turned to friends and a bit of therapy before redesigning the shape of her working life. She no longer wanted one all-consuming thing, opting for a combination that could sustain her. Right now, that's family, study and service, sitting as a magistrate alongside raising her children and researching a PhD. But as for the future, well, that way lies adventure. So let's all rise. Court is now in session. Hi Pip, welcome to the Wobbly Middle.
Hi.
Pip, the first 20 years of your career took you to some fabulously interesting places. Japan, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Singapore. Tell us what it was like to be working as a young female management consultant at the time.
I think I was just incredibly lucky to have that opportunity to get out there to begin with. Initially, didn't think it was an issue at all, being female. So in my late 20s, most of my friends were settling down, having kids. I'd just come out of a 7-year relationship and I was just looking for a bit of an adventure, to be honest. So I remember a rainy day in London applying for about 100 jobs, not getting many positive replies, but then, following up on the 5 I did get, and was just thrilled to end up in Hong Kong at the time. I actually thought I was negotiating pounds and I was negotiating dollars, so my salary was half what I thought it was going to be, but took it anyway. And initially I didn't think anything about, being a woman, but I think over time, during the 20 years, I was definitely able to use the fact I was female to my advantage. I was working with almost entirely initially white men. So it tended to be white men who were running the show and largely sort of local Chinese, initially women who were supporting them. And that then meant that there was a huge client base that I could tap into of women, Chinese women. And so I'd go along to the various women's groups and just by chatting to them, I could talk about what we did and suddenly there were great opportunities.
And you taught yourself Chinese?
I learned a little bit of Chinese. I'd studied Japanese at university, so that really helped. It's the same sort of foundation to the language. My Chinese isn't great at all. Japanese is a bit better, especially at karaoke. But enough to get by. I mean, taxi level. Although I never actually learnt to say my address properly in Chinese, so I always had to get dropped off at the neighbouring street.
I had the exact same experience when we were living in Vietnam. I never got it right.
Yeah.
For those of us not in the corporate world, can you tell us a little bit about what risk consultancy is all about?
So essentially it's supporting companies making different decisions. And you tend to have certain kinds of expertise. So you'd get economic consultants or political consultants. And I was a risk consultant. So I was looking into the different risks that businesses were facing. They'd largely be off balance sheet, i.e. non-financial risks that I was dealing with. It would be things like who their business partners were, what political issues they might face, were there issues of fraud or deception or intellectual property problems.
And in terms of your fraud and corruption investigations, was it ever scary? Did you ever get into sort of where you felt you'd uncovered things?
Maybe I was a bit naive, but I was just always excited by it. We were dealing with a lot of organised crime-related issues, dealing with many people who probably should have been in jail. And particularly in China, there was definitely political overtones. To some extent, I was protected by the fact that I wasn't a local. When I worked in Shanghai, you knew there'd be someone in the office who'd be reporting back to the government. I personally wasn't at the forefront and too exposed to anything that risky, but some of my colleagues who looked more at home there would go undercover in factories, would actually watch trucks go in and out to see whether businesses were doing what they were meant to be doing. Often they'd say that they were, I don't know, cutting down lots of wood, but there was none seen, or transferring pigs or chickens, and there were just empty trucks going, and the whole thing was totally fabricated, or taking people to factories that were completely different from the ones they were meant to be. So, the company headquarters, the bosses would come over from America thinking, let's see what's happening. Is there any prison labor? Is there any child labor? And they'd be taken to a completely different factory, the one they thought they were going to, because they couldn't read Chinese and didn't know what was happening.
Gosh, that's fascinating.
And we'd have someone undercover who would be able to say, well, this one looks fine and dandy, but in fact, the one down there is falling apart and is illegal.
Did you always see yourself in that world long term?
Not in the slightest, actually. I was in journalism initially and loved the excitement of it, but unfortunately the pay wasn't great and I was looking to travel. I was just looking for, it wasn't about the career, it was just the adventure, the excitement, something a bit different, because at that time, a family, children, perhaps a more traditional sort of outlook on a woman's life, at least according to my mum, wasn't on the cards at that time. Let's try something different. And then partly because I didn't have those ties, those responsibilities, whenever a new position opened up, I always put my hand up and then basically just got
For more adventure.
For more adventure. And so I'd find myself on a boat to Korea or hiding out in a village in Indonesia looking at palm oil. And I didn't have anything stopping me. So I could always just, go for it.
And now as we sit here, you're living back in your hometown in Oxford,
I am
city of
indeed.
dreaming spires.
Lucky me.
Tell us about what brought you back home, essentially.
I really wanted to have a family. And I was in Shanghai at the time and I was single and I was looking into how that might be possible. IVF for single women isn't possible for various political and social and cultural reasons in China.
In China.
So I knew I'd have to come home if that's something I wanted. And ideally, I was looking for a partner too. And there's going to be more people perhaps I have an affinity with back in my home country. So I requested the transfer home and had a wonderful time back in London, sort of reconnecting with friends and still focused on this project on the side, to try and ideally find a partner and have children. And I always said, if I got to 40 and I didn't have a partner, then I'd have children by myself. That ended up being what happened. And at the same time, unrelated to that, but at the same time, I then completely out of the blue got made redundant. And that was a massive shock. In time, I was able to see it as a commercial decision, but at the time it felt extremely personal. I was one of those people, my identity was completely wrapped up in my work. I volunteered for all the committees and I was always sort of organising charity events. My social life was through work. I absolutely loved my work. I really, really did. But unfortunately, the business decided to go in a different direction, as they say. And it was kind of like a nasty breakup. It's like being dumped for the first time. I completely got the rug pulled out of my feet, thrown under a bus. Anyway, very long-winded answer, sorry.
No, but so there would have needed to be some kind of emotional repair after that.
Yeah, so a lot of crying. I probably did sink into sort of depressive state. Fortunately, not for a long period of time. I had an amazing group of friends, and one of them suggested therapy. So I spoke to a counsellor for a couple of months, and she was amazing. It was really just someone to offload to. It was just what I needed. And I mean, there was nothing sort of too groundbreaking that she did, but just focused on, what made me happy. She got me to do like a happiness bowl. So she said, whenever you're in a moment of happiness, just write down what it is and just throw it into the bowl. And then we'll chat about it. We'll chat about what's sparking joy, to use a well-coined phrase. What's just really making you sort of lift up today. And we obviously had the chats about what made me feel a sense of achievement, what gave me a sense of kind of self-respect and self-confidence. And that goes back to the kind of slightly more cliched childhood chat, what your background was and how your parents drove you and things, which was really useful just to get a better sense of self-awareness. And during that time, negotiating a really horrible redundancy, I don't think it's well, sometimes it's nice. Mine wasn't nice. It felt very bitter, very fractious, very angry. I didn't feel I was dealt with fairly.
I think also
And
when you've been heavily involved in your workplace and it feels like they're there to support you and you're giving everything, then in a case of redundancy, it's sort of the gloves come off and everyone starts relying on the legal position and what the law says.
yeah,
And that feels so at odds with the way you've conducted yourself up until that point.
that's completely right. It didn't
difficult.
feel like I was seen as a person. I was just seen as another employee, which is exactly what I was to the business. And I get that now, but at the time, goodness, it didn't feel like that.
I wonder if you ever, after an experience like that, you always have in your mind that experience that work can become transactional quite quickly. Sometimes I wonder if it's not easier for those quite brutal things to happen in your early 20s to kind of be more aware of that. You know, we sometimes have misplaced loyalties, I think.
I think you're completely right. To be honest, it was probably the kick out the backside I needed. I was so involved in my work. To some extent, I was heading to burnout. I didn't really know how to say no. As I say, I was volunteering for everything. I seemed to have no distinction between my private life and personal life. I had no time to focus on other things that were really important to me. So I think a lot of friends said to me at the time it was an opportunity, but it took me a while to see it as such.
Yeah, that therapy is helpful as a process of rebuilding, but it's also a period of time which forces you to regroup. And
Yeah.
the therapy helps structure that regrouping.
Yeah. No, it really did. And I needed that. I was sort of working through what I wanted and what was going to give me a sense of direction ahead. And I still wanted to have children, and I was still trying for that. But that wasn't the only answer. There were other things I wanted. So I was doing bits of volunteer work on the side. I joined a few friends' CSR campaigns, corporate social responsibility campaigns, just on a volunteer basis, just things to give me a sense of satisfaction. And one of it was a charity called Shofco. And actually my plan was to go out to Kenya and work for them because I like having a backup plan. And so the idea was try and get pregnant and focus on that aspect of my life. But if not, I was going to go to Kenya. And back to your original question, I was quite lucky. I ended up getting pregnant. So I knew that returning back to Oxford at some point was always going to happen.
So you have these two wonderful small children,
Yeah.
but you have this endlessly inquiring mind and this sort of natural drive to learn more. And what other plans were emerging about, your working life?
So what I decided to do was try and find a career, try and find a profession that fit with having a family. So I looked at various options while I was doing this freelancing, and I did quite a bit of music growing up. So I thought, right, let's become a music teacher. So I did a qualification with ABRSM, the Associated Board, and I started to teach children and adults from home. I still do this. It's great fun. But then I also thought, well, long term, I'd like to go back into work. What can I find that's going to get me from where I am now to a new profession? I thought I need some kind of degree. I have a master's and an MBA, so I needed the next one up. So that's a PhD.
But you say it so casually. So I'm just going to retrain as a music teacher and now I'm going to go back and do a PhD. A lot of us worry that window for us has passed. How do you motivate yourself to go back to the academic world?
Oh my goodness, I think this is the ideal time to do it because I have the experience, I have the desire, I'm a bit more secure in other areas of my life. I actually have something to give, I think, to the academic community. And when I look at my peers who are also doing PhD, they're largely 30s, 40s. It's no longer people who've just gone from one degree to the next. It's people who've gone out, got some experience. They're practitioners. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. It's focused on business and international development. It was what I was doing the latter half of my career. So looking at the extent to which businesses support the development community related to the Sustainable Development Goals. And then on a monthly basis, I am volunteering as a magistrate.
Yes, I'm very interested in that because that's how we met.
Indeed,
through
yes.
a friend, because I was asking about that. It's a role many people don't really understand. What led you to the courts? But also, can you tell us a little about the role of a magistrate?
It was a friend that mentioned she was doing it. I was looking for a volunteer role. I've been very fortunate in my career because I was working in risk and finance. I was relatively comfortable in terms of background and where I'm sitting. And I felt I had the time and energy, inclination, desire to give something back. So I was looking how best to do this. Quite a lot of volunteer roles, because you don't have the training associated with them, they're associated with fundraising, which obviously is fabulous and essential, but I knew I wanted to do something a bit different. It's the idea of working with the community, playing a responsible, integral role in the British judiciary, but as a volunteer. I think I was attracted to it because it was cerebral volunteering, so I could use my brain, I could use my skills. There was quite a lot of flexibility involved in it. There was training given. There was opportunity to take on more responsibility. So in terms of the practicalities, that really fit what I wanted from a volunteer role. Initially, there's quite a long period of training, but then after, you interviewed and you're accepted and you get the training, you basically sit in court. So I think it's about 95% of criminal cases that are dealt with by magistrates.
Yes, so it's the first port of call.
Indeed, it's where even the most serious crimes, everyone will go through the magistrate system just to get in the process.
And the emotional weight of that role, because you do sentence people. In the morning when I attended the court, the first case that came up was a charge for sexual abuse against a minor. And it was quite real life.
Yeah.
From the first 5 minutes.
No, indeed. You get really horrendous cases. I don't like to call them run of the mill because obviously for everyone that comes, it's a scary experience for them in court. But you do get more common matters that you deal with. That first one of the day when you came was a slight outlier because that would have been transferred to the Crown Court. So what we were doing as magistrate is just listening to the severity of it so we could decide what we're going to do with this person while he waits for a date in the Crown Court, which, as you may know, can be quite a long time off. What kind of bail is he going to have? Should he be put in custody while he waits for that if he's, a very serious, dangerous offender? Should there be any restrictions placed on his liberty? I think we did place restrictions on this person's movements in terms of who he can contact and where he can go to protect the victims or potential victims, because I'm not sure he actually pled guilty. But there are more common matters that you deal with, and it's not that you can protect yourselves from those, but you just become more used to a certain process in terms of how you're dealing with them. So, you often get driving offences. They don't seem that serious, but of course, driving offences, if the wrong person's in the wrong place, it could still lead to some nasty outcomes. And so you get a lot of those, many of them associated with drugs, largely because people don't realise how long drugs can stay in your system. And so when they're caught speeding and then they have a drink and drugs test, even if it's 48 hours later, there can be something residual and then you're banned.
One thing that was impressed upon me when I went in there is how very alone you are when you find yourself being charged with something, especially for young people who may have sort of made those errors of judgment. I definitely will be taking my teenage children to the courts. It was a very thought-provoking morning for me. But the other thing that I really noticed was the thought and care that the magistrates took into moving the court system along, because it was evident from the morning I sat there, just the time, the backlog of how long it is taking for cases to get through the system, which has an impact on the accused and the victims.
Absolutely. And I think, unfortunately, it's only going to take longer because of the announcements this week. There's going to be a lot more cases that are sent towards the magistracy, which means magistrates are going to have more to deal with. So there will be a big recruitment drive for magistrates.
What surprised you the most when you were first sitting on the bench?
What surprised me? A couple of things. There's still quite a large distinction between the people who are sitting on the bench, 3 magistrates usually, and those in the dock, based on age, background, ethnicity, and often gender. There's a complete distinction between the defendants and those who are meant to be their peers who are judging them. And I think, unfortunately, because the magistrates aren't paid, it means that it tends to be people who are retired. It tends to be people who have
Financial
just a little
security.
financial security, a little bit more time in their lives. And so they're often older, and they often come from a very different background from those who we're seeing on the other side, who often come from very, very difficult backgrounds.
This question's linked, but has the role changed how you see community, society more broadly?
I'd like to think I have a lot more empathy towards the wider community. I certainly have a huge amount more awareness of the community I live in. People think of Oxford and its dreaming spires. And oh my goodness, what a beautiful place to live in. But there's a huge amount of desperation. There's a lot of people who don't have the opportunities afforded to so many, who don't have the chance to get these opportunities to begin with.
And the literacy levels in some areas are so horrifyingly low.
Yeah, and there's just almost no chance for people to have any other way out. As a magistrate, I can only speak personally, but what you try to do is see their situation as a whole. So we have sentencing guidelines that we're following. So when someone comes into court, they're charged with something, they either plead guilty or not guilty. If they're not guilty, you hear what they've got to say, and then, there's a trial and we decide as a 3. But eventually, assuming they're found guilty, you come to a sentencing decision, and you're always encouraged to look at the totality of that. So not just what they did, why they did it, what drove them to that, what's their actually entire situation, did they have no alternative? There've been some awful cases of vulnerable individuals, and for example, one man, his house was being used as a drug den, but he had learning difficulties. He wasn't aware of what was happening. He was renting that place. Do we evict him? Do we send him somewhere else? He's got nowhere to live. Do we put him into custody?
What does rehabilitation look like if that's one of the legs of what a sentence should seek to do?
You try and look at it as a whole. Probation, which again is very strained, but they play a really crucial role in the decision, because they will often do what's called a pre-sentencing report, a PSR, which is essentially a big profile of the individual. And before you sentence anyone, you're encouraged to get this report. And that will give you the family situation, the background, what's actually likely to work for this person. Could we give them some rehabilitation? Because you get rehabilitation days. Could these be used for some sort of addiction support? Or could they be used to help people manage their money better? Some sort of mental health awareness or facilitation of some kind of therapy. There's a lot of programs in the community, and those are likely to help many of the individuals better than the rather sort of crude fining or, of course, sending someone to jail. Jails are strained anyway, but is that the best course? Is that really where many of these guilty defendants should end up? Probably not.
It comes down to resources again, doesn't it?
It comes down to resources.
Well-funded community service programs, well-funded rehab centres, and funding in the jail system, which is stretched everywhere.
And the court system as a whole, which is why magistrates are sorely needed, because someone needs to underpin this entire process. And currently, I believe the numbers are actually, I read the other day, 4,000 as a nation, 4,000 below what they need to be to have a full system. We've got a backlog as well. Admittedly, I don't go over my minimum 13 days. I'm definitely not, they call them high sitters. I'm definitely not one of those. I play my small part, but there's definitely opportunities for anyone that might be interested at all.
Yes, I'll put the links in the show notes for people to find out more.
That would be amazing. And if anyone is interested, what I was encouraged to do is just go and sit in court for a couple of days. But basically see how the process works, see if it's something that you're interested in, you'd like to get involved in. It might not be for you, But if it is, then you'd have to do, I can't remember what they call them, but just sort of viewings of a court session in process so that you could talk about that and respond to that in an application process. And as I say, there's quite an involved interview process. So during the whole process, you get a feel of whether it's for you by the people that you're meeting, the nature of the questions, just that the whole interactions that you're having. And then assuming that you get through these various gateposts, even then there's training, there's mentors, there's a lot of support around you. I do the minimum at the moment, which is 13 days. So just over one a month. And you can choose which days you're going to sit. So I just sit in term time. But for those who've got more time,
There's more to
awful
be
lot
had.
of responsibilities. You can get involved in going into schools, for example, as someone who actually runs a sort of an outreach program and either takes magistrates into school or brings children into the courts. There's family magistrates, youth magistrates. You can get on sentencing councils.
As a layman, you don't have to have had a legal background.
You definitely don't need that background. I mean, you can. I'm working alongside people who've been former barristers, former solicitors. They can't be practicing, but there's so much training. And in the court itself, there's a legal advisor.
Court-appointed legal advisor.
Exactly. And they are paid and they're extremely knowledgeable. And if we have any queries or doubts, questions about the points of law, then we can just ask for some quiet time outside and he or she can come and join us.
And just now going back to your career arc, you X amount of years on from that horrible redundancy period, but you're still feeling stretched and interested and fulfilled?
I am now. It's, I guess, what you'd call a sort of portfolio career. So I have the sort of cerebral side on the PhD. I have the fun side with the piano. I've got my volunteer work with the magistrate work. And then underpinning all that is the family.
Is there a thread that ties them all together?
I think they balance one another. I'm not sure I could just do one of them. I mean, underpinning it, flexibility, and I'm in control, to be honest. Because any of these things that I'm doing, I can turn the dial up or down. And I like that.
And what would you tell your 30-year-old self?
It's never too late to make a change. You can always reinvent yourself. Advances in science means you don't have to have kids immediately. There's always more opportunities. Try everything, seek out everything. Ideally, try and find a foundation, be that financial or personal or social, something that gives you something to launch from. It does help to have financial security, however you're going to obtain that. But somehow getting a sense of self, and you're the only one that can give that to you. You can't get that through your work, through your family.
And where's your curiosity pulling you now?
Well, it's my daughter's nativity play in 15 minutes. And she's a chicken. So
Congratulations. You must be very proud.
she's thrilled.
Well, onwards and let's make sure you get there on time. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, complete pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to The Wobbly Middle. If you enjoyed this episode, I think you'll love another one from season 1 with Emily Connolly called Lab to Lifeline. Emily's an academic, but during COVID, she started a food bank that's now reshaping how local networks respond to food waste.
And if you have a second, please leave a review and share our pod with your friends. It really makes a difference.